A boot kicked the kitchen door open so hard it cracked against the wall. A man came through it fast, a rifle in one hand, his face gone white. He'd smelled it from the yard, and it had stopped him cold in the dirt like a bullet. Beef, onions, sage and black pepper. A smell that had not come out of that house in 3 years. The big cast iron pot was sitting on the stove. Steam rose off it. Somebody had been in his kitchen, and somebody had used that pot. Whoever made this stew, the man said, and his voice shook with something worse than anger, is a dead man. His name was Wade Barlow. His wife had been dead 3 years, and that was her recipe, in a drawer no living soul had opened since the day she died. Then something moved behind the stove. Stay with me. To understand why a grown man came near to losing his mind over a pot of stew, you have to understand what that house had been. Wade Barlow was 41 years old, and he ran a mid-sized cattle ranch out past the ridge, a good spread that he'd built up over 20 years of hard, honest work. He had good grass, decent water, and a reputation as a man who paid what he owed and said what he meant. In the eyes of the valley, Wade Barlow had done all right for himself. But nobody in the valley had seen the inside of that ranch house in 3 years, and there was a reason for that. Because for 11 years, Wade had been married to a woman named Ellen. And Ellen Barlow had been the warm, beating heart of that whole place. She was one of those people who made a house feel like somewhere you wanted to be. She sang while she worked. She kept a jar of wildflowers on the table year-round, even in winter, when she had to make do with dried ones. She fed every ranch hand who came through, and half the neighbors besides, and nobody ever left her table hungry or unhappy. And Ellen cooked. Lord, could that woman cook. But the thing she was known for, the thing folks talked about for miles, was her stew. It sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. It was the sort of food that made people close their eyes when they ate it. She'd worked it out over years, her own way, and she kept the recipe in her own handwriting in a book in the kitchen drawer, and she'd laugh and say she'd take it to the grave. She had. That was the trouble. 3 winters back, Ellen Barlow had taken sick. It came on fast the way those things did back then, and there was no doctor closer than a day's ride, and by the time one came it did not matter anymore. Wade had held her hand at the end and told her he'd be all right, which was the only lie he ever told her. He was not all right. What Wade did after she died was the thing that folks in the valley whispered about. He did not sell up. He did not remarry. He did not, so far as anyone could tell, grieve in any way a person could see. He just went quiet. He worked the ranch from dark to dark, harder than any 2 men, and he came home to that house at night, and he shut the door. And he did not change one single thing. Ellen's apron still hung on the hook by the door. Her shawl was still folded over the back of her chair. Her boots sat by the stove where she'd left them. Her jar on the table still had flowers in it, dried ones now gone brittle and gray, but Wade never took them out. And her cast iron pot, the big one, the one she'd made 1,000 suppers in, sat cold and clean on the back of the stove where it had sat for 3 years without once being used. Wade ate from a skillet. Beans, bacon, cold biscuits, coffee. He ate standing up mostly, and he never once cooked anything in that pot, and he never once opened the drawer where her recipe book lay. He'd hired no cook, no housekeeper, no woman to come in and set things right. When his old friend Marta from the next ranch over came by that first year with a basket and an offer to help tidy the place, Wade had thanked her at the door and not let her past it. Because here is the thing about a man like Wade Barlow. He was not keeping that kitchen as a shrine because he was crazy. He was keeping it because it was the only thing holding him together. As long as the apron hung on the hook and the pot sat cold on the stove, some small stubborn part of him could still walk into that house and feel like Ellen had just stepped out to the garden and would be back directly. The moment anything moved, she would be dead all over again. So nothing moved. Nothing. That was the arrangement Wade Barlow had made with the world, and it had held for 3 years. And then he came riding in one evening in the fall, tired and dusty, and smelled his wife's stew coming out of his own kitchen chimney. I want you to understand what that did to him. Because it was not just surprise. It was the ground opening up. That smell was Ellen. It was every good evening of 11 years. And there was no way on God's earth that anybody living could be making it, because the recipe was in a drawer in a dead woman's handwriting and nobody had opened that drawer in 3 years. He didn't think. He came off that horse before it had fully stopped, and he pulled the rifle from the scabbard, because some part of his brain had decided a thief was in his house, that somebody had broken in and gone through her things, touched her book, used her pot. That somebody was in there right now with their hands all over the only thing he had left of her. And he kicked the door off the latch and roared that whoever made that stew was a dead man. He meant it too. In that one black second, he meant every word. Then something moved behind the stove. It was a child. A little girl stepped out from behind the stove with her hands up in front of her, the way you do when a man is pointing a rifle at you. She could not have been more than 9 years old. She was filthy, and her dress was more patch than dress, and her hair was a knotted mess, and she was so thin that Wade's whole insides turned over at the sight of her. She was shaking hard. But she looked him right in the eye. "Don't shoot, mister," she said. "It's just me." Wade Barlow stood there with the rifle in his hands, and something in his chest went out like a lamp. He lowered the gun. He set it against the wall. He couldn't seem to make his voice work for a second. "Who in the world are you?" he finally said. "Maggie," she said. "I'm sorry about your door." And then, from underneath the kitchen table, another face appeared. A little boy, 4 years old at the most, with the same dark eyes as the girl, clutching a wooden spoon like a weapon. He looked at Wade and then bolted across the floor and hid behind his sister's skirts, and Maggie put a hand back and pushed him further behind her without ever taking her eyes off Wade. That gesture did something to Wade Barlow that he could not have explained. A starving child putting herself between a rifle and her little brother. He had to look away for a second. "That's Sam," Maggie said. "He's 4. He didn't do nothing, it was all me, so if you're going to whip somebody it ought to be me and not him." "Nobody's whipping anybody," Wade said. His voice came out rougher than he meant. He pulled out a chair and sat down, mostly because his legs did not feel entirely reliable. "Sit down. Both of you. Sit down and tell me what you're doing in my kitchen." They sat. And little by little, over the next hour, the whole story came out, and it was worse than Wade had imagined. The children's mother had died in the spring. Their father was already gone, killed 2 years before that. They had no people. And when a child in that country has no people, there is a system for it, and the system in that valley was a man named Silas Pike. Pike ran what he called a home for orphaned and destitute children out past the crossroads. What it actually was, everybody sort of knew and nobody looked at too hard. Pike collected children, and then he hired them out. Boys to farms and mines. Girls to whatever household would pay for a servant. He took the wages. The children got fed just enough to keep working. And if one of them ran, Pike came after them, because a runaway child was money walking away from him. Maggie and Sam had been at Pike's place 4 months. Maggie did not describe it in much detail, and the way she did not describe it told Wade more than any details would have. 6 weeks ago they had run. They had been living rough since. Sleeping in barns, eating what they could find, moving at night, keeping away from roads. And 2 weeks back, cold and starving, they had crept into the big empty barn on the Barlow place, because it was warm and full of hay and the man who lived there never seemed to come out at night. "I know it was stealing," Maggie said, staring at the table. "The eggs, I mean. I took eggs. 2 most days. And some milk. I know it was wrong, mister, but Sam was, he was getting real thin, and I didn't know what else." She stopped. Her chin was trembling. "I'm sorry." Wade Barlow, who had come through that door 20 minutes ago ready to kill somebody, discovered that he could not speak at all for a moment. "The stew," he finally managed. "Maggie, how did you make that stew?" And the girl looked up at him, confused, like it was the least important part of the whole business. "Out of the book in the drawer," she said. "In the kitchen. There's a book with recipes wrote in it, real pretty handwriting. I can read some. Sam got sick this week, he's been coughing bad, and he's so cold at night, and I thought if I could get something hot in him." She swallowed. "I know I shouldn't have come in the house. I waited till you rode out. I was going to feed Sam and clean the pot and put everything back exactly how it was, and you never would have known, only the meat took longer than I figured." She looked at the floor. "I picked the stew because the writing said it was good for a sick person. It said so right on the page." Wade got up. He walked slowly to the kitchen drawer that he had not opened in 3 years, the one he could not open, the one he had walked past 10,000 times. His hand shook when he pulled it. Ellen's book was there. And it was open, laid carefully flat, to the stew page. And in the margin of that page, in his wife's handwriting, in her own hand, were the words the girl had been talking about. "Good for a sick child. Extra sage. Cook it slow." Wade Barlow stood in his kitchen with his dead wife's handwriting in his hands and a starving orphan behind him who had made that stew to save her little brother's life. And the wall he had built for 3 years cracked right down the middle. He turned around. He looked at those 2 children, really looked. Sam was coughing. He had a fever, Wade could see it now, bright spots on his cheeks. Both of them were skin over bone. "When did you 2 last eat something proper?" he asked. Maggie thought about it, honestly trying to answer. That was answer enough. Wade Barlow took a long breath. Then he went to the stove, and he took down 2 of Ellen's bowls from the shelf where they had sat untouched for 3 years, and he filled them both to the brim from the pot, and he set them on the table in front of those children. "Eat," he said. "All of it. There's more." And then, because he had to do something with his hands, he turned away and stood looking out the window while two starving children ate his dead wife's stew at his table, and he did not let them see his face. That night the children slept inside for the first time in 6 weeks. Wade put them in the spare room, in real beds. He got broth and honey into little Sam and sat with the boy until his coughing eased. He hung Maggie's ruined dress by the fire to dry and found an old shirt of his for her to sleep in. And when they were finally asleep, Wade sat alone at his kitchen table in the quiet house, with the smell of Ellen's stew still in the air, and for the first time in 3 years, that house did not feel like a tomb. It felt like a home again. Just for a night. He sat there a long time. And then he said, out loud to the empty room, "All right, Ellen. All right." He'd figure out what to do in the morning. Maybe write to the county about a proper placement for them. Maybe just feed them a few days and see. He never got the chance to decide. Because at first light, there were riders in his yard. Wade came out onto the porch with his coffee and stopped dead. 4 men on horseback. And the one out front was a soft, heavy man in a good coat, with small eyes and a smile like a crack in a plate. Wade had never spoken to him, but he knew the face. Silas Pike. "Morning," Pike called out pleasantly. "Mr. Barlow, isn't it? I do apologize for the hour. I'm on county business." He shifted in his saddle. "I'm looking for 2 runaways. A girl of 9 and a boy of 4. Wards of my institution. Been tracking them a week and the trail brings me here." He nodded at the barn. "You'll want to check your hay. Little thieves nest in barns." And Wade Barlow, standing on his porch, understood in one cold rush exactly what he was in. Because this was no longer a matter of 2 hungry children and a pot of stew. This was a man who had legal papers on those kids. This was a man who could ride up and take them, today, out of that house and back to whatever it was Maggie would not describe, and there was not one thing in the world that would stop him, because in the eyes of the law, Silas Pike was their guardian, and Wade Barlow was a stranger with no claim on them at all. The whole nature of it had changed. It was not about grief anymore, or a broken door, or the past. It was about whether those 2 children got taken back this morning. Now, if you're pulling for Wade and those kids the way I am, do me one favor and hit that subscribe button. Because what this old rancher did next is the whole reason I wanted to tell you this story. Now stay with me. Wade drank his coffee. He took his time about it. He had learned a long time ago that a man who does not hurry makes other men nervous. "Haven't seen anybody," he said. Pike's smile stayed exactly where it was. "You wouldn't mind if we looked?" "I would, actually." Wade set the cup down on the rail. "This is my land. You're not walking on it without I say so, and I don't say so." "Mr. Barlow." Pike sighed like a patient teacher. "Those children are legally in my charge. Harboring them is a crime. I'd hate for a respectable man to find himself in trouble over a couple of thieving strays." "Then it's a good thing I haven't seen them," Wade said. For a moment the 2 men looked at each other, and everything that was actually being said passed between them without a word. Pike's smile finally went away. "I'll be back," he said, "with the sheriff and a warrant. And when I find they've been here, it'll go hard for you." He gathered his reins. "They're not worth it, Barlow. They're nobody's children." And that was the sentence that did it. Because Wade Barlow had spent 3 years being nobody's husband, in a house nobody came to, keeping a kitchen nobody ate in. He knew exactly what it was to be nobody's anything. And the idea that a fat man on a good horse could ride onto his land and call that little girl who'd made stew to save her brother nobody's child. Something in Wade Barlow woke all the way up for the first time since Ellen died. "You do that," Wade said quietly. "You go get your sheriff. And while you're in town, Pike, you might stop and see a lawyer of your own. Because I'm going to be in the county seat by noon, and I'm going to file for guardianship of those 2 children. And then I'm going to sit down with the circuit judge, and I'm going to tell him some things about what goes on at that home of yours. And then I'm going to find every child you've hired out in this county, and I'm going to ask them to tell the judge too." Pike's face changed color. "You can't prove." "I don't have to prove a thing," Wade said. "I just have to make a judge curious. You've been getting away with it because nobody with money ever cared enough to look." He came down 1 step off that porch. "I've got money, Pike. I've got a good name in this valley, and no wife and no children and nothing on this earth to spend either one on. And I have just now decided what I'm going to spend them on." He came down another step. "Get off my land." Silas Pike sat there a moment. Then he wheeled his horse and rode, and his men went with him, and Wade stood in his yard until the dust settled. Behind him, The door opened a crack. Maggie stood there in his old shirt, white as paper, with Sam clinging to her. "He's going to take us back," she whispered. Wade Barlow turned around and crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. "No," he said. "He is not. I give you my word." And then he went and saddled his horse, because he had a lot of ground to cover before noon and not 1 hour to waste. Wade Barlow moved faster in the next 4 days than he had moved in 3 years. He went first to the county seat and filed a petition for guardianship of Margaret and Samuel Doyle, writing their names out in full on the paper and feeling something strange and enormous happen in his chest as he did it. He hired the best lawyer in the county, a sharp old man named Whitaker, and paid him a retainer that made the lawyer sit up straight. And then Wade told him everything. Whitaker listened, and then he said what Wade already knew. Pike had legal custody, and courts do not like to take children from a lawful guardian on the word of a stranger. Wade's petition alone would not be enough. What they needed was proof of what Pike actually was. So Wade went and got it. He spent 3 days writing. He went to every farm and mine and household in that county where he knew Pike had hired out a child, and he sat down with the people who had taken those children in, and he asked questions. And what he found was that half of them had wondered for years. They'd seen the bruises. They'd noticed the children arriving hungry, always hungry. They'd handed wages over to Pike and watched him pocket money that was supposed to feed and clothe the boy or girl working in their yard. None of them had said anything. Not one. Because it was not their business, and Pike was the county's arrangement, and everybody assumed somebody else was looking. Wade Barlow gave them all the same thing, a chance to stop assuming. By the 3rd day he had 11 people willing to stand in front of a judge and say what they had seen. He had a former cook from Pike's own home, dismissed the year before, who could describe exactly what those children were fed and exactly what happened when they got sick. And he had Marta from the next ranch over, the woman he had turned away at his door with her basket 3 years ago, who took one look at Maggie and Sam and moved into Wade's spare room to care for them without being asked, so that no one in that courtroom could say the children were living improper. And on the 4th day, the hearing came. Silas Pike walked in confident. He had the papers, and he had the law, and he had a lawyer of his own. He explained to the judge in his smooth soft voice that he ran a charitable institution, that the children were runaways, that this rancher was an unmarried man with no experience of children who had gotten sentimental over a couple of strays. Then Whitaker began calling witnesses. He called the farmers. He called the mine foreman. He called the households. One after another, ordinary people stood up in that courtroom and described children coming to them starved, bruised and terrified, and wages handed to a man who never spent a dime of it on them. He called the cook. And her testimony about the winter of the year before, and what happened to a boy named Thomas who got sick and did not get a doctor, made the whole room go silent. And then Whitaker called Maggie Doyle. Wade had not wanted it. He'd fought it. But Maggie herself had said she wanted to, and Whitaker had said quietly that the judge needed to hear one of them, and so a 9-year-old girl in a clean new dress walked up and sat in the chair and told the truth in front of a courtroom full of grown men. She told it plain. No crying, no dramatics. She talked about the cold and the hunger, and what happened when Sam wouldn't stop crying at night. She talked about running. And then the judge gently asked her one question, why she had gone into Wade Barlow's house. And Maggie said, because Sam was sick, sir. And there was a book in the kitchen with a lady's writing in it, and next to the stew it said it was good for a sick child. So I made it. That's all I wanted. Just to make him better. Nobody in that room said anything for a moment. The judge ruled before noon. Silas Pike's guardianship was terminated on the spot, and his institution ordered closed and its children placed under county review, with a formal investigation into the misappropriation of their wages, which would end months later with Pike in a prison cell. And temporary guardianship of Margaret and Samuel Doyle was granted, that same morning, to Wade Barlow of the Barlow Ranch. Maggie did not understand at first. She sat looking around at all the standing adults, and then she turned to Wade with her eyes huge and asked, in a small voice, whether it meant she and Sam were going somewhere else now. And Wade Barlow, in front of a judge in a courtroom and God and everybody, got down on one knee in front of that child. It means you're coming home, he said. With me. Both of you. And nobody is ever taking you anywhere again. The adoption came through the following spring, and after that they were his, as legally and completely as if they had been born to him. The ranch changed. That is the only way to say it. A place that had been silent for 3 years filled up with noise, with a boy hollering in the yard, with a girl practicing her letters at the kitchen table, with Marta stopping by so often she finally just took the job of housekeeper and made everybody stop pretending otherwise. Sam got healthy. It took a few months of real food and warm beds, but he did, and by summer he was a brown-armed, loud, entirely ordinary little boy who followed Wade around the ranch like a shadow and asked 900 questions a day. He started calling Wade Pa about 6 weeks in, without any ceremony, just talking, the way children do. Wade had to go check on the horses for a while after that. Maggie took longer. She had been the one holding it all together for so long that she did not know how to stop. She flinched at raised voices, and she still hid bread under her pillow at night months later, out of pure habit. Wade never once said a word about the bread. He just kept the kitchen full, and let her see it was full over and over, until one day she stopped. And it was Maggie, in the end, who did the thing that finished healing Wade Barlow. That first winter she asked him, carefully, the way she asked anything that might upset him, whether she was allowed to use the book in the drawer. Ellen's book. And Wade sat with that question for a long moment, and then he got up and took the book out of the drawer and put it in her hands. "It was my wife's," he said. "Her name was Ellen. She'd have liked you an awful lot." He cleared his throat. "It's yours now. Learn it all. That's what it's for." So Maggie Barlow learned to cook out of a dead woman's handwriting, and the recipes that had been shut in a drawer came back out into the light one by one. And Ellen's cast iron pot went back on the fire where it belonged, and got used most weeks, for the rest of Wade Barlow's life. He took the dried flowers out of the jar that spring, too. He and Maggie put fresh ones in, and after that there were always fresh ones. Ellen's apron stayed on the hook, but Maggie wore it, and Wade found that seeing it move around that kitchen did not break him at all. It did the opposite. He had been so afraid that letting anything change would mean losing Ellen twice. Instead, letting the house live again was the first time in 3 years he could think about his wife without that iron band around his chest. Years later, when Maggie was grown, she would tell people how she came to be a Barlow, and she always told it the same way. "I broke into a man's house and stole from him," she'd say, "and he came through that door with a rifle promising to kill whoever had touched his wife's kitchen. That's how it started. And by that night he had me and my brother fed and put to bed in clean sheets, and inside a week he'd taken on the worst man in the county for US and won." And she'd smile. Folks always ask what changed his mind. It wasn't me. It was her, his Ellen. She wrote in the margin of that page, years before I was ever born, that the stew was good for a sick child. And I read that, and I made it, and I think when he saw that book open on that page, it was like she reached back and told him what to do. Maggie would shake her head. He didn't need saving from us. He needed something to be for. And 2 hungry kids in his barn gave him one. And out on the Barlow ranch, in a kitchen that smelled of sage and slow-cooked beef most Sundays, an old rancher sat at the head of a full and noisy table. He'd said whoever made that stew was a dead man. Turned out she was the one who brought him back to life.